Lindsay Preston. I'm the founder of WritingRoom.com and the co-host of Story Mantra. I'm here with my co-host, Andrew Catani, author of Duty and Desire. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for chiming us all in and getting this started. We are so excited today to have two phenomenal people on board. I mean, I couldn't be more excited after 20 years to know that this day is happening. First of all, we have Aparna Bhattacharya. She is the executive director of Raksha, and I'm going to ask Aparna to tell us a little bit more about Raksha. But she's been the executive director since 1998. She is, and this is incredible, folks, she is a White House Champion of Change in 2013. She's the proud recipient of the Georgia Commission on Family Violence, and that's the Family Violence Gender Justice Award, and DeKalb County Domestic Violence Task Force's Deborah C. McDermott Award. Welcome, Aparna. I'm so thrilled.
I'm very excited to be here. What an honor. And I always love when there are stories reflecting the realities of domestic violence and, of course, folks from our community.
Well, thank you for coming on board. And then we have, and again, I couldn't be more excited, we have Greg Laughlin. And wait till you hear about him, folks. He is the Director of Community Engagement for Men Stopping Violence. Greg is certified in Family Violence Intervention Program. He's an instructor. He's a public speaker, writer, and he has appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, NBC.com, WSB-TV, Voicemail Magazine. Welcome, Greg. I am so thrilled to have you with us.
Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us. This is wonderful.
Lindsay, let's get the ball rolling.
Okay, so we are going to start our session today, and we're going to talk to you first, Greg, because what we really want to help writers do is create a realistic abuser, because there's obviously they are not purely evil. They're still a human being. So let's start off by, what are some of the common traits that you see in the men who come through your organization?
Well, and again, I'm really excited to be talking to writers about this and just the potential power writers have to portray the complexities and the realities of both men who use abusive and controlling behaviors and women who experience that. And I want to say first that I know that there's, women who sometimes use abusive or controlling behaviors. We know that happens, but the overwhelming amount of domestic violence or intimate partner violence is male violence against women and children. And so I'm going to be using that language as we speak. And so, I think a couple of things are to think about when we're talking about men who are abusive. And notice my language there a little bit. I'm not saying batterers, I'm not saying monsters, I'm saying men who are abusive. And I think part of that shows the complexity around these are people who, in some ways, are being fiercely loyal to a script that they've learned about manhood, and are being fiercely loyal to that and are using abusive and controlling behaviors. So a couple of just kind of common factors, I think, just to get going. One of the common refrains around men who use abusive and controlling behaviors is it's about power and control. So that's one thing as writers, I think people should really think about. I think a lot of times people think, oh, well, this is about anger management. This is about an explosion of anger. And the men that we work with, and I work at Men Stopping Violence, and we've been working with men for 38 years. The men that we work with are very polite in class. I've never been threatened in any way. These are men that have never attacked police officers or others. Their abuse is very targeted, and it's very targeted often towards their partners. And so it's about power and control. And so, I think that's one thing. And men use a range of abusive and controlling tactics. I think often we think about hitting or strangling or those kind of things, and those are awful. But there's also a whole campaign of emotional abuse, of emotional put downs, of withholding help on childcare, withholding help on housework, you know, a whole range of things that men can use to maintain power and control over a partner. And so often, you know, violence is kind of a last resort. When a man feels like he's losing power and control, or losing what he believes is his rightful place kind of as the head of the household, that's when he uses violence or sexual violence to maintain that hierarchy. And so those are a couple things that I wanted to point out around common elements among men who use abusive and controlling behaviors.
Aparna, can I ask you? You also said the same thing. You said it's not about anger management and about anger issues. You said it's about power and control.
Yes.
So can you explain from the victim's perspective, sort of to tie in with what Greg has said?
I mean, we're going to probably say the same thing. We've been working together for years, but it's really about whether it's whether someone's allowed to go to classes or to work, or they're having their money taken away from them. It really is about a way that an individual is using power over them and controlling where they go, their immigration status, controlling who they connect with, controlling what they wear. So it can play out in so many different ways, but ultimately it's about power and control at the end of the day. And so, you know, the victim may not have autonomy to call their parents. They may not have autonomy to go out with their friends and have a good time. Maybe they don't have access to the bank account, or maybe they're working and they don't get to spend money on things that they want. Maybe it's the shampoo or whatever. So it plays out in so many different ways, and it depends. And there's a whole extreme of like how that can play out, right? Because you may have folks who cannot work, who aren't allowed to go out, that cannot shop, or you may have somebody who does that, but they don't have control over the money, or they can't make decisions, or they can't, you know, I've even heard like where people can't even have vegetarian food if that's what they want, right? So not being able to get the items that they want from a grocery standpoint or have that respected.
You know, one of the things that we had talked about before, which also really plays into your book, Anju, with your character, Rakesh, is that these people, and Greg, as you were saying, they don't actually come off as rude or outwardly violent or rough, like what you would picture as being combative. Do they tend to have a very charismatic side, or are they able to easily fool the people around them who's not being abused?
Well, that's a great.
Yeah, I think definitely. I mean, again, these are people that by and large are moving through society targeting their abusive and controlling behaviors towards people that they feel entitled to do that. And so often that's women, often, you know, with white men, that's people of color as well. You know, they're the same messages that tell me as a white man or as a man that I'm entitled to services and submission from women. Also, those same messages also tell me that I'm entitled to a superior place on the racial hierarchy. And so, you know, it's from the same tool book there. And so, you know, I do think that we often move very easily through the world and are seen as good guys because the entitlement is very targeted.
What about with children? Because it is, you're saying people, they feel they're allowed to do this too. Are men who are abusive to women also abusive to children? Do you see them, does it tend to run together? Or is it just, or have you seen men that are just abusive to children, just abusive to women, and tend to be great, are who are abusive to the mothers, but tend to be a great father?
So I would say it's really, if you're abusing a mother, I'm not sure you can still be a good father. If you're harming the caretaker or somebody that the children love, it's really difficult to also be a good father in a global sense. But I think what we see often is men who, again, if it's about power and control, men who use the children to control the partner. And so in some ways, the children are pawns. There's research out there that men who are abusive are more likely to try to get custody of their children, and they're more likely to get it. Because here you've got somebody that's put together. He probably controls the money. She's pulling her hair out after years of abuse and worry about the kids. And so he's more likely to try to get custody, and he's more likely to get it. And so, I think that also portrays something that women have going against them and that men have going for them, is that these systems like the court or the police often see this man that's well put together, has resources, and there's a lot of women blaming out there and victim blaming. And so he's getting other men and other institutions to kind of side with him, and she's paying the price, like divorce court or custody decisions.
You also see a lot of, or at least in the movies, the abusers that say things like, "I'm doing this for your own good."
Yeah.
I'm helping you. Why can't you see I'm helping you? Do they truly believe that? Is that something they believe, or is it something part of the gaslighting process?
I really think they believe that. I think, we get pressure on us to fix individual men as if this is an individual problem. And part of our role at Men Stopping Violence is to hold the mirror up to the community and hold the mirror up to the messages that men are receiving from their faith communities, from laws, from movies, and other things that all say that men are more important than women, that men are smarter than women, that men are entitled to control women and children. And so I really do think when a man says, "Hey, I'm doing this for your own good," they're being fiercely loyal to that script that they've received, that patriarchal script that they've received, that they're smarter and they have a right to control other people. So I do believe men believe that.
Part of the belief comes from the parents. Do you see a lot of the men where a lot of these men abused or came from similar rearing?
So, I think, a lot of the men that we see, there are traumatic instances in their background. And again, the overarching theme and background that we see is a patriarchal culture that prioritizes men and say men need to be able to dominate and control women, and if you don't do that, you're not a real man. And so from an early age, men are getting these messages that to be nurturing or to share power or to do other things like that is unmanly, and men are punished for that. So I do think within that patriarchal context, there are tremendous traumas that men experience as part of that. There's the author, Bell Hooks, says the first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves. And so you've got men that are killing off the emotional parts of themselves to care and to love, to fit into that patriarchal model. Plus, within that model, there's sexual violence towards children. Child sexual abuse is rampant. Boys are seeing their dads and moms engaging in substance abuse, and there's neglect, and there's corporal punishment towards children that is scarring towards children, and boys are seeing their mothers being beaten up. And so all of these are traumas that boys are experiencing, and women and girls are bearing the brunt of it, but boys are experiencing it. And then in a patriarchal culture, there's no place for boys or men to attend to that. if, there's no safe place where men can go to and learn and say, I was sexually abused as a child. I was, my dad was so drunk that I was neglected as a child, and it really hurts. They're not places for men to do that within this culture and within this society. And so you've got men who've experienced traumatic changes to their brain based on trauma. We've got men that are out there that are hyper vigilant, based on those traumatic changes. We've got men that, are in a constant kind of fight or flight mode. And, those are two things that patriarchy kind of reinforces. If you're a man, it's okay to flee, it's okay to get out of a relationship, and it's okay to fight. And so we've got men out there just on edge because they're not places to go to attend to those traumas. And so we've really shifted over the years. We used to believe, okay, all we need to do is focus on accountability. All we need to do is hold men accountable and they'll change. And we still believe that. We still believe that men need to tell other men to stop. And that's really key to ending male violence against women. But now we also believe that if we don't attend to those other traumas, then we can't get men to a place of wellness. And if we can get men to a place of wellness, women and children benefit from that as well. And we start to end the cycle. So we do believe men need places to talk about that trauma and to attend to that trauma for both their own well-being and for the well-being of women and children.
Wow, Greg, that was really insightful. And I think, from the writing perspective, when we go deep into the psyche of our characters, we call them layers based on what you've just said. But here's a question that, has been just kind of circling me forever and ever. And this is a question I'm throwing out to both of you. So you and Aparna both. When you have an abuser in an abusive situation, and you pointed out he's very specific and targeted because they're charming, they're suave, they're very they're well-mannered on the outside, but their abuse is very targeted. What I've also learned in the process is they're also coming from a level of insecurity. And that addressing that level of insecurity for them in the best way they know how, which is abusing, somehow gives them a level of security or safety, something. Could you talk a little about that so we kind of begin to understand where they're coming from, where they could be traumas, like you said, but what has shifted in that trauma situation that now puts them in an insecure position to do such an act repeatedly?
I'll start, Aparna, and maybe you have some insights on this. I think it's a terrifying, if you've been taught that you're not a man unless you're in control, the idea of not being in control is terrifying. I'm Episcopal. I've got an Episcopal priest mentor who, said she was on Men Stopping Violence's board, but she used a Christian kind of metaphor, but like being an abuser is like needing to die and then be reborn, because it feels like to a man who's abusive, it can feel like dying to be told you're supposed to be in control and to actually let go of the control. When everything you've learned and everything you've been taught and all your traumas say your lifeblood, your survival depends on being in control, how do you take that terrifying step of letting go and letting somebody step away? And so I'm not sure, Anju, if I'm answering your question, but I think it is a life or death feeling that men have as they're learning to let go of control or to let a partner go. And so some men can do that and other men, cling back to that control with devastating impact on them and their partners.
So what you're saying does resonate, because as writers, this is something I've learned, that, the emotional death of a character is when he cannot have what is absolutely mandatory for him to live. So if you're saying from your perspective of the abuser that, you know, control and power is absolutely mandatory, it's a learning, it's an imprint, so to speak, then maybe that answers the question which I posed in the first place of why is it targeted? Why is it, you know, because if you're performing these horrible acts on your wife and children, they're stemming from your own relationships, especially the children. Even though you may see the wife as or the spouse as an outsider, certainly the children are your own. So is it blindsided? Is it living in denial? I mean, Aparna, do you have any thoughts on this as well?
All right, so my thought, I mean, very similar to Greg, I believe that, you know, someone is insecure and so they want to feel secure. And sometimes having power over something can make you feel stable and secure. I think about like sometimes when we don't feel like we're in control, we'll start cleaning and start organizing and trying to do whatever we can to make ourselves feel like we have control over a situation even though we may not, right? If I just tidy up and clean everything up, right? Then I'm going to feel like at least I have control over this. And if you feel like you don't have control over other aspects of your life, then you're going to focus on what you do have control over, right? Which is your family. And the way I also talk about it is I also think about like in our own ways of when we personally use violence or when kids use violence, right? If you think about children, I think all three of you are parents, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm not a parent, but I have family members. I'm an auntie that's very much involved. When we're having a bad day, who do we lash out against?
The one,
Right.
yeah, the one who's sort of beneath you in the hierarchy.
But also the person that we know will always be there for us.
Right, right.
Right? So kids will lash out at the parent that is always there and secure, and they may lash out to us very differently than they do to strangers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And maybe it's that false sense of safety, but it's like I feel safe. I know if I act out, I still have control over the situation, and this person isn't going to leave me. And it's that false sense of security that makes us, you know, sometimes, I mean, I'm not going to say that none of us are capable of using violence, but like I act probably the worst with my partner because I know my partner is going to be there. I'm not, you know, I'm not saying I'm horrible, but I'm just saying I'll be testier and moodier and I take things for granted, but I also know he's always going to be there. And there's that assumption. And a lot of kids will do that. Our kids will act out and treat us a certain way because they know we'll be there, right? And there's that sense of safety.
Wow. That's a whole new perspective. Really is.
It's just something I've been thinking about when I think about kids and when I think about who we act out and who we misuse our power with. And it's usually the folks that are closest to us.
Right.
It's a sad, unfortunate truth, but, and Greg may totally disagree with me, but I'm just thinking that that's who they feel safe with because that person is not going to hold them accountable the same way that the outside world will hold them accountable.
And I think that's really true what you're saying, and that's a human kind of dynamic. I think one of the differences here is, in addition to that real dynamic, men have a cultural mandate to control and to dominate their partners too. So not only is there that real human element of I'm close to somebody and so I'm going to lash out, you know, there's also thousands and thousands of years of mandate behind it and lessons behind it saying you have a right to do this. And, you know, if you're feeling insecure, this is a person that should be taking care of that. And if they're not, you can punish them for that. And so I think I agree, Aparna, and there's like an added weight when men do that with their partners.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So it's like a sense of ownership in a way.
Yes, that's
right?
exactly it. Ownership and entitlement, a birthright.
Ah.
So I've got a challenge to you all as writers, or something I'd love to see in stories. And I'm a writer too, not a fiction writer, but so often in our classes, we work with men and they've done awful things to their partners. And often, you know, they've hit some kind of wall before they come to our class. But I'll ask men who've used public abusive behaviors towards partners, has any other man in your life, a man that you cared about, come to you and said, hey, I care about you, but I want you to stop that. And when you do that, I feel less respect for you, and I care about you, but I don't want you to do that anymore. And almost invariably, men say no. Until the criminal justice system got involved, nobody told them to stop. No other men in their lives told them to stop. And so a vision or the community that I want to see is where men, it's not the vision of a man, oh, he's beating somebody up, so I'm going to beat him up, or I'm going to beat the heck out of him. It's men who care about each other enough to say something to another man and actually say, I care about you enough that I want you to stop this. And so what are those examples of communities of men or communities of people long before the criminal justice system gets involved that say, cut it out? And so I would love to see that in stories, because I think, it happens sometimes, but it's a world that I'd love to see envisioned more.
And that was great. That's actually a good spot to kind of stop our session for this week. We are at our half-hour point. I want to thank you both, Greg and Aparna, for being here, and they will both be back with us for our next session next week. For more information on both organizations, check the links in the description below. And thank you all for your time, and we'll see you next week on Story Mantra.
Thank you, Aparna and Greg.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.